I'm not sure how long this will go, but what we'll do is if you could just down your morning coffee, and we'll flick through some photos and some sketches, and then maybe talk through how some of the details work, and go from there in pretty free form sort of conversation. So when we do that, I'll flick my camera around and face the iPad so that we can sort of screen share. But just first of all, what's your fascination with this particular piece of architecture, and how did you come to know it?
I started out studying architecture a long time ago at Sydney Uni back in the 80s, and I had a tutor then who was a big fan of Paulo Mendes Rocha and introduced me particularly to the works of the Paulista, so the sort of generally perceived to be a sort of brutalist concrete movement from the 50s and 60s in Sao Paulo, and it stuck with me forever. I just, it was a love affair. I think there was a bit of a love affair with Brazil, curiously, as well. My mother had a bit of a thing for Astrud Gilberto. So I just grew up with a soundtrack of Astrud Gilberto in the 70s, and, Brazil was at the top of what for us was soccer. Brazil was just a bit of a fascination. So all those sort of stars aligned. And then,
from studying architecture, you then went into construction.
I took a fairly lengthy path to get round there. So I started out studying architecture, and then I went to live in London for 12 months and ended up staying 15 years. And I ran a motorcycle workshop. I was a motorcycle courier to start with. Then I ran a motorcycle workshop. Then I bought into a partnership in a motorcycle courier company. Then we had a hire bike company. And then I started doing metal fabrication. And then we bought a building down in South Bank in London and renovated it. And I was hooked. I mean, I'd always renovated houses and all that sort of stuff.
I'm keen to know, how did your first piece of concrete that you were responsible for compare to the concrete that you saw at architecture school?
Yeah, look, the first couple of attempts were pretty rough, I have to say. Yeah, it's there's a lot to learn, which is kind of interesting, because the reason I ended up in Sao Paulo and actually ended up in studio with Paulo for a few days was to do with a potential scenario where someone was working with him, but understood that I love Paulo's work, but I particularly love concrete, and they wanted to actually be able to sort of grab what that sort of perfect imperfect level, which is really hard to convey to someone, that it doesn't. There's just an immediacy to the way it's been formed and the way it's been poured. It doesn't look sloppy, and trying to find that balance between it's just done quickly. The formwork it's been formed with care, because everything's straight and everything's true, and the sort of 40 mil wide beams, they're 40 mil.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't appreciate that. So what I'll do is flick the camera around to your photos that you've taken, as well as some others, and then we'll talk through some of these points. Right, let's get the ghetto scanner to work. So what we're talking about here is the width of the concrete, right?
Yeah. So particularly, Paulo was doing it crazy thin, and there's places where, I mean, that's structural concrete. It's got reinforcement in it. I crawled all over this house. I spent 2 hours at Casa Butantã with Paulo's son Lito, who grew up in the house, and he showed me every nook and cranny, bits and pieces that I hadn't even noticed. Like where you go into the bathrooms, there's a wooden doorknob, and on the back of the doorknob is a little rubber stopper, and it kind of looks like an afterthought. And he'd said to me, no, it's not an afterthought. No. And in fact, it's on the drawings. And if you take that little, it's out of a hardware store, just a standard little rubber stopper. If you take that off the back of the door no longer opens to 90 degrees. Like, it's all been set up exactly for that. Now, that's a real, I suppose I should explain that in Brazil, there's basically 2 schools of architecture. So there's the Paulista and the Carioca. So the Carioca from Rio and the significance, the difference between the two and the different styles is that the Carioca school was a Beaux-Arts architecture school. So it came from a sort of arts and the history of architecture and the history of art, whereas in Sao Paulo, Mackenzie, which is the school that Paulo had attended, it's from an engineering background. So it's architecture born out of engineering rather than architecture born out of a Beaux-Arts approach. And so consequently, and you can see it in his work, he really gets materials, he gets reductionist use of materials really, really, really well, like extraordinary. Yeah. And I poured all over these houses. This one, his own house, which, by the way, it's not widely recognised that this is actually one of a pair of two houses side by side. So he built two houses, and
they're actually adjacent to each other.
Yep, exactly next door to each other. So there's 2 blocks of land. He's got the one on the corner. His sister had the one next door. They're not quite a mirror image of each other. They're actually a bit different, but outwardly, they're basically.
And which one was done first?
They were done concurrently. So they were built at the same time as each other.
So there was no sort of evolution of the idea. It was the one idea over 2 sites. And so this is some of the things that I'm seeing are the boards don't express, they haven't been sandblasted. They're not imparting a texture other than what was sort of naturally in that piece of wood. But the thing that the perfect that you were mentioning is interesting, that just even the alignment at the beam and the beam interfaces, they're not, it's not about, or maybe there is an actual.
It's not about being. We get really precious about those sorts of junctions. And Paulo shrugged his shoulders. And there's a couple of places where I'd asked him about it, and he was kind of curious by the question as to, this hasn't aligned with this for a reason for it. And he was like, well, why would it? Like, it's just the form.
Okay. Yeah. What's going on? What am I seeing here? Like, I'm not. Maybe it's just the light, but
no, you picked it up. So
this one here as well.
Yep. So the best way of understanding the building is that if you imagine that it's a shoebox with a slightly oversized lid. So the base,
this being the lid, and then down here is the base, and then here's the offset that you're talking about.
Yep, and they don't quite meet each other. So when it comes down the side of the building, you actually end up with, it's about a 6-inch gap between the lid sitting over the base, and as you go down the side, there's actually glass inset into the side where they meet each other, and so you actually get this glorious reflected light coming up from the greenery beneath. But where there's that oversized lid, because those sort of skirting beams that are coming down, they need to be more substantial. So they're actually 70 mil thick, but to make them look light, they've chamfered off the bottoms. So they're about 30 mil from underneath. And when you look at them from a distance, it really has a really significant effect on lightening the way they look.
Yeah, so it's taking the lightweight there and then transferring it down here. So in section, or go to somewhere dark, in section it's coming down, hitting the front face, and it's all square.
Yep.
And then it comes across chamfers.
Yep.
So you're getting this
and
reading.
It's about a 45 degree the chamfer.
About a 45.
So
Yep. Yeah. So
when you actually read that from the street, you can't pick up that there's actually that extra thickness behind.
Great. Yeah. And I was just going to say, so the reading is that the beams are extending out. There's 2 conditions. One where there's the end beam over here.
Yep.
And then this one. So the beam at the other end of the house would occupy this sort of zone here.
Correct. Yeah, and its purpose. So on that, the side that you're looking at now is north, and so we wanted to get the light in. On the south side,
so the equivalent of our south light.
Same
hemisphere. Okay.
Yeah, I had to think about it for a sec. Same. Yeah. So on this side, there's no skirting beam across the north face because he wants to get the light in. The purpose of the one at the other side there that you were looking at a minute ago is really interesting because it's something that Paulo does repeatedly and really, really well. It's a reflector. It serves 2 purposes. One of which
so that's why it's open up here.
Yep.
It's open up there to get the light onto the surface, and then
and it bounces it back into the dark side of the house.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's actually this side here, isn't it? Now, these aren't your photos. These are the original sort of finished work photos.
That's a relatively recent set by Nelson Conn, but that is how much light comes back in. Yeah. That photo there of the windows is a little deceptive because they are black, but consequently they're really hard to photograph to actually get a full effect because they just.
When you say black, do you mean because of the lighting behind them, or the glass itself is dark?
No, the steel frames are just black steel. So in that they look almost like they've been chromed. I think he's just sort of played around with the
where the light is hitting here. Yeah. Now you sent me this detail from a book that I promised to buy myself. One thing that surprised me is in doing the Google Translate is the fixed glazing and the operable glazing. So the bottom portion of the glass is formed into a channel. So this piece of glass here can actually slide in there. And
no, they are both fixed. Yeah, it's confusing the way that it's drawn a little bit.
Yeah.
So no, they're all fixed. The interestingly, because this was done in Butantã was done in '64, basically the same windows, and it also gets confusing on the internet because frequently the windows. There's a second house that was done in 1967 called Casa Butantã for a client, and he used basically the same window design there, but without the two panes of glass. It's just a single pane, and it can get confusing because those windows are frequently found on the internet as listed as being Casa Butantã. But this is where he was a real sort of part spin raider, and until. I mean, I visited him at his apartment in Sao Paulo, and he had a little sculpture that he'd made out of a plumbing valve. He was always a maker his entire life, and his father was an engineer. It's the way he saw things. He was trying to explain to me a beam, and he just took a piece of A4 paper and folded it up as to what he was trying to convey as to what this beam was going to do in the design that we were talking about.
That's because they use paper for the formwork. Just joking, but it is insane how. So, in your own practice, or you're trying to re-engineer or understand how this was achieved, and it's probably sort of. I mean, did you get a lot of explanation about how the formwork was produced to achieve such thin concrete?
Look, I've seen photos of it.
Yeah.
And look, there's a couple of places where there's kind of a few tricks. Paulo's was not averse to pulling a few little clever tricks that a bit like that chamfer underneath the beam. There's where the entrance to Casa Butantã is, you come up and there's what appears to be this dramatic cantilevered platform that's got no end in it. That's the sort of landing as you come up the stairs. And to exaggerate the fact that it seems like a really big cantilever, there's actually a beam tucked up underneath that you can't actually see. But to over-dramatise the fact that there's this ridiculous cantilever, the two side pieces of concrete that are effectively the handrails are cut, and a drain is put across right in that spot to exaggerate it. He plays those sort of little games frequently. But that incredibly thin concrete, I only found two places on Casa Butantã or Casa Mazzetti of any concrete cancer, and it was really minor. Like the front step coming in there has got, you can see the Rio. There are other places you can see the pattern of the Rio
because it's so close to the edge of the And so did they use any tie? How did they maintain the position of the Rio while they were casting the concrete?
Yeah. That's a very good question, and one I couldn't get an answer to.
By iometer?
Well, there's over at Casa Mazzetti, there's some joinery, and in fact, there's a chest of drawers in here. So so that there, the fireplace half is actually a block that's been brought in. It's a box effectively turned upside down. It sits on top of the timber floors. I've seen a construction photo.
So you can see the timber going underneath.
Yeah. And the couches behind there, they're all made out of concrete.
Yeah, so this here is concrete.
Yep. Yep, and underneath.
And so then is it one piece?
Yeah, it's one piece. There's a back that runs through in between those cushions, so it's like two sofas back to back, effectively.
Yeah. I can see the back of the other couch. Yeah, sofa.
And behind that, you can see the dining table. That's also concrete. Yeah. It's about 25, 30 mil thick.
Yeah.
So it's and again, it's got Rio in it, fairly thin. But look, there's no cracking. There's no anything else. There's there's some of the joinery that's been done that I did discover how they did it. And there's a fair chunk of kidology in there because it's concrete, but it's kind of rendered rather than being cast.
Yeah. So do you think there's? I mean, this is board formed on both sides, but
yep.
Do you think there's any areas where it's just been like formwork on one side and then Rio, and then concrete sort of troweled on, or was it always cast?
That's what they've done with the 25 mil thick stuff, but this all seems to have been poured in situ. It's all cast.
Yeah. You've got elements that require casting in, and then especially in the beams.
Yep.
You know, there's weldments up in here.
Yep.
That are positioned in the mold first with the Rio, probably tied to the Rio, so that you can then later come in and weld your window hinges to the.
Yeah, those windows work beautifully, and the clearances are all still really tight, and yet there's almost no adjustment possible with them. And
I think virtually you've got a few washers that you can change in here.
Yeah.
But then, I would, this is at a time where you didn't prefabricate 4 months in advance and then pour the concrete and hope that it worked. Like these guys would have been welded, and then you'd take a dimensional thing and if one needed adjustment, it would be made to fit. Yeah.
Yeah. But they, the ones that, they've had a lot of use, and they still operate, both sides of the building really beautifully.
Yeah. And so this is not an off-the-shelf thing. This is all made bespoke for this.
Yeah.
For these windows, and this is just a flat sheet metal, right? That's been.
Yeah. I suspect what he does or did repeatedly is borrow the restraints at the bottom. They're an off-the-shelf item from a couple of people had said to me that they thought that they were from a Land Rover. They're not, but there's something like that they're apart from somewhere that he's found.
Yeah, so there's this guy here, and then from photos you've sent me previously, I forgot to paste it. Here we go. Check this out. The magic of the internet. So you sent me a photo that was.
So that's the one at Mazzetti. So it's basically the same.
The hex or
rather than all.
Yeah. And then invented what I think the section should look like. It's pretty basic, but just things that are pinned, and there's no embarrassment about the fact that it's a cotter pin that's that's holding
really that was very utilitarian construction.
Yeah.
But I suspect actually those side channels are probably inspired by, if not. That's not where they're from, but I think they're probably inspired by, Brazil was flooded. I mean, they made VW Beetles in large numbers, very large numbers. Yeah. There's a glazing channel that goes at the bottom of these wind-up windows on a VW that is basically that design.
Yep.
I would feel relatively confident that that's where he's sort of taken that from and said, it's simple. It's basically, and the way that in a VW, you wind up windows, there's a metal channel, the glass gets dropped in, it gets held in there with a bead of mastic, and that's it.
Yep.
And you wind it up, you wind it down, you wind it up, you wind it down, it stays there. And he's just taken that and said, look, it doesn't need to be any more than that. And he was right, it doesn't.
Yeah, so this here's the frame. Oh, sorry, I'll just change that layer. This is the frame that's welded to the beam above.
Yep.
And then this is the portion of frame that's attached to this window. This guy here is the other side. And these here are just the cotter pins that are pressed through a drilled hole to fasten it all together. So it's very, very simple in its execution. And to remove a window, you slop out that cotter pin. You can move the bushing, the central pin across until it gets to there, and then you can remove the window. But that was sort of, there's no need to remove them, right? Like they were installed once, and
yeah. I don't think, maybe if those washers wear. Oh, hello to Rolando, Mr. Oscar Niemeyer Works, and friend and compatriot from my Brazil trips.
Oh, when we wind up, he can request to join, and we'll chuck him in the call.
Yeah. Oh, look, I suspect that maybe those washers have been replaced at some time, maybe, but it's kind of the only really wearing part.
Yeah, I think they're just spaces really, because once it's installed and the movement is really on the bearing here, the bush at that point.
Yep.
So this here is the welded bushing that sits there.
Yep.
And then there's weld here. And what we're seeing is that rectangular block is the section through the folded metal bar.
Yep.
At the top. So there's no, the washers that are between them are just spaces. So yeah, I can't imagine that they'd ever wear out.
No,
unless
and they're not. They're also not that heavy.
Yeah. It's insane how narrow the concrete is.
Yeah.
And then there's there's channels to accept the
Yep.
So so here's my Google Translate, and with your help, I think you jumped in here to help me out a little bit. I like the way that solder is for any Americans on the call, that I think we've finally answered that it's not soldering, but solder, that the welds exposed, they're not ground back, that it is very,
it's almost agricultural, but it's
in the same way that that's how I would explain the steelwork at the Sydney Opera House. It is beautifully refined, but there is, and this is not, I don't think it's detrimental, but and it's not to take anything away from, but agricultural is kind of, it can be pretty, but it's not pretentious.
Yeah.
And it's utilitarian.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of his kind of last buildings is the Cesc 24 de Mayo in Sao Paulo, done in collaboration with MMBB Architectus, and there's, I think it's got to be about 7 stories of curtain wall there that's on what appears to be from a distance a sort of proprietary spider system, but it's not. It's site welded, fabricated arrangement that, when you get up close to it, is really quite, to be honest, it's pushing the boundaries for me of roughness in its fabrication. And yet the same thing, you look at the alignment of all the glass on the outside and it's spot on.
Perfect.
Because, on site they can, if that one's got a bit of a twist in it, if you're able to just sort of cut and weld on site, tweak it, bend it, then you can true everything up, and they have.
What year was that project?
That opened the year I think it opened in 2016. Yeah. It hadn't been open long when I was there in 2017 anyway.
Yeah. One thing, just a minor thing that you might remember, is is that a rebate in the beam for the glass as well? For the fixed glazing above? Fine.
Yeah, I can't remember actually, now that you
would
asked
be
that.
Up in here.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think it's...
It doesn't look like it, does it? Maybe no. The channel is just at the top, the glass, and then the glass dead low.
I think it is. I think it's actually hung, and I think there's like a little bead of mastic down the side.
Yeah. Okay. Bit of faith-based silicon application. It's a bit hard. I think that I would hope that this here is a little dead load shelf.
Okay.
Maybe it's a spider web, but there's something happening in here. Maybe that is to pick up the. No, awesome. It's
I'll have to go.
It's probably just all of the silicon up and over that's helping hold it in place.
Yeah, pre-silicon though. So yeah, it is. That's a good question actually. I'll have to have dig
There's silicon
back.
at falling water, so I doubt it.
Yeah.
Do you think it was mastic? But it looks clear to me.
Yeah, it does.
But I've not been there, so maybe we should go and pop over.
We'll have to go, mate.
Look. Yeah. Okay. You had your Freedom Day last night. Was that you jumping on taxis?
No, I wasn't jumping on taxis. No. I did, however, go and visit some friends last night, and we drank a slightly obscene amount of beer and wine, and ate massive T-bone steaks and revelled, which was wonderful. Yes, it's been a long time here in Melbourne, down in one form of lockdown or another. So yeah, things are certainly looking a little more positive.
Cool. Hey, we've had a request to join. Who was it that was going to maybe jump on? Who runs Oscar Niemeyer Works?
Yeah, Hollando.
Okay. No, it's just other dudes wanting to get their face on it. Cool. What else should we chat about?
Look, we were talking about that beam at the rear, reflecting the light. Yeah, so there's a similar thing at Casa Leme, formerly Casa Milan, where in the same sort of scenario, there's a beam running across, and I did ask Paulo what its purpose was, and because I was expecting him to sort of come down and explain, as with this, that it's sort of it's that one there's got a dual purpose. There's actually a house behind, so it screens you from looking at the house behind, but at the same time,
there's rooftops there, and then a wall in here.
Yep. And this house, when it was built, it was a new neighbourhood. It was a double vacant block on the corner. The construction photos, there's no trees, and it's actually been screened from the road by building an earth bund around it.
Yeah.
And so I was conscious of the fact that and these days it's encased in the. Oh, thank you, Philip. Talk about the bedroom walls. It's a very good idea.
Yeah, I just spotted that one.
It's
hard to moderate and talk at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and now it's all surrounded in greenery, and it's very easy to see it as an object sort of isolated from its surroundings. It's in suburbia, and you'd
never know, would you?
No.
The way that maybe it's architectural photographers not actually photographing a lot of context, but maybe it's just the greenery and the quality of light that makes it feel.
Yeah, and the fact that it's behind this earth bund as well means that it is kind of separated, and when it's photographed, it generally looks like it's kind of in a jungle. But this house, at the time this was built, Paulo was teaching at Sao Paulo University, and this suburb is basically at the gates. So he walked from here to work every day. One thing about the windows, which I meant to say earlier, is that Paulo. One of the things that's really interesting about them is that their resting state is open, which is
there was a question about that, what the mechanism is, and I think I can talk to that. That when the window is in the closed position, it's the latch that's holding it there, but because the pivot point is out here, the resting position is not mechanical. It's this wonderful thing called gravity.
Yeah, which is really reliable.
It's bloody reliable, yeah.
And so consequently, when you open them all up, they all hang on perfect alignment with each other because they're
that tells you is that they're all the same weight.
Yeah,
or probably the position of the pivot point relative. So the welding of this guy here.
Yeah.
That center line is perfect. So that they all do hang in there.
It's also in line. This house was a bit of a kind of a statement of principle. So within that, Paulo had said there's no such thing as private space. There's only sort of shades of public space.
That's interesting because that's a theme that it's so common in modern architecture, that there's this this is my private, and then it's often a driver in design to then play with that public and private interface, the gaze onto the street or looking back. But so how was it more of a spectrum that they would consider?
It was a kind of a social concept as much as anything. Brazil was going through political turmoil, start of a dictatorship effectively, and this idea, and Paulo's very good friend and compatriot Artigas, who designed the architecture faculty at the University of Sao Paulo, who in fact had to flee the country as a communist, and was effectively chased out. Paulo told some good tales of having had to hide Artigas when he came back from his exile, and full on cloak and dagger stuff, meeting on street corners with the guy lighting the cigarette, kind of. it was a very tough time in Brazilian history if you were a communist or associated with, or if you were if you were on the left and an intellectual. And Paulo was forbidden from practicing, and teaching for many years. This is the same period at which Niemeyer moved to France. And so that theme, which brings to Philip's point, goes through the entire house. The bedrooms have only got louvered shutters, which is the same at Casa Butantã. The walls in between the bedrooms are 30 mil thick concrete, but they don't actually reach the ceiling. So they're I don't think I sent you a good photo. They are basically precast panels that were actually cast on the floor, and then stood up, and they run in between. So the grid layout basically works in line with the ceiling beams. So they all sit underneath one of those, and there's a cast-in stirrup into the top of the beam.
You said the beam was 40, right?
Yeah.
Did you say the beams are 40?
Yeah.
And so the panels,
I think the walls are about 30.
And they're about 30, so there's a separation of 5 mils.
Yep. And then there's an inverted stirrup, metal stirrup that goes up and over the top, and then has a pin up into the beam.
Okay, so that was cast into the... Was that cast into the partition?
I think, well, we were trying to work out whether the wall panels had been slid in, or quite how it had been fabricated. It might have been that they are actually they've drilled a hole and they've just slipped the pin in effectively, and they're loose. There is a drawing in that book, I think, as to how they meet the floor too.
Okay, I'd be disappointed if there wasn't a rebate.
Well, no,
or do they just sit on the flooring?
Well, the flooring is actually effectively up on pedestals. So it's a timber floor over the slab, and it's got I'm actually just looking through the details. If anyone, this little monograph, which is available from editora.com.br, it's a little monograph about the house. Absolute
cool. We'll do a post tonight on with the book details.
If it's even better, I'm sure, if you speak Portuguese. But the photographs.
Well, you don't need to, because you've got the Googles, and I think the books are a neat, or any details in any other language than your own is a way of sort of, for yourself in your own time, pulling apart how you think that construction went together, and by replicating them and sketching. It's, whenever people ask me how to do shit, it's you definitely don't do it like this live on a freaking IG session, but you grab a detail, you turn down the transparency, and you slowly bloody draw over it and
eke it out.
Yeah. But let's put some details up and get them some more book sales.
There's a good photo. Yeah, there are some really nice details in there. Interestingly, there's actually showing that the door pivots and things where they're fixed up into the beams, it is showing nylon raw plugs, which in '64 they must have been pretty cutting edge at that point, I would have thought.
I think they used cigarette butts and matchsticks in Australia at that point, didn't they?
Yeah, whittling back bits of timber and shoving them in holes.
Yep. Awesome. Hey, is there anything else you wanted to run through before we wrap this up?
I think, unless there's any particular questions on there that people are...
Yeah, okay. I think there was quite a few. The comparison between these windows and Zeddy we've covered. I'll try and scroll back through.
Yeah, look,
you close the window by pulling in the ball handle. I think you twist it, don't you?
Yeah.
So you reach out and grab it?
Yeah, so it basically, once you've lifted it up out of that catch, it dangles.
Yeah, so there's the dangle.
Yeah, so you grab it, you pull it up and over the restraint, and then you tighten that up.
Oh, so is there a spring in there, or
no?
Okay.
No.
I had a fail with your video of you operating, or Philip's video of you operating it. So this is threaded.
Yep.
So you can undo the thread to this back position, and then it comes up and over.
Yeah. And the way they were set up there, in fact, because their resting position is open, they're actually under load. So if for general day-to-day use, they were just left a little bit loose. You pull it in, you can pull it up and over the catch and just leave it.
Yeah.
And it won't
So
rattle
by pulling it
the
in,
window.
you're actually pivoting the window. You're pulling the window frame in a little bit to get it up and over.
Yep. Yeah, correct.
I haven't drawn the hatch yet.
I suppose the interesting thing as well with Mazzetti is that, Paolo designed this house for himself, and, there's no acoustic separation inside the house. There's gaps above all the walls. There's gaps under doors. The bedrooms have got just louvered shutters at the rear. And in fact, I've actually seen a photo from, I think it was from House and Garden, Brazilian House and Garden magazine from, I think, about 65 or 65 maybe. And there were no shutters on the back of the bedrooms then. They were just open to what is effectively the sort of shared space in that corridor at the rear. But what's remarkable about Mazzetti is that, like, it's a very, very, I mean, some have referred to it as being sort of quite a monastic interior, but it's, he got a wealthy, relatively wealthy middle-class family to not only engage him, but embraced it. Interestingly, at Mazzetti, that the driveway at the end of it rolls down a road that sort of does a hairpin, and it's right on the outside of the hairpin. And the driveway goes down under the house to the swimming pool, and all of that area was actually asphalted, and there was no gates. And Paolo's intent at the time was that the swimming pool would be kind of communal. It would basically, he wanted the house to be part of the suburb, and that, that there wouldn't be this divide, which apparently the Mazzettis went along with until very soon after having moved in, and they immediately put up a series of gates and closed it off from the suburb. But, it's a...
Reminds me of Philip's clients that had a tennis court that was a free-for-all.
Yes, yeah. Yes, with that, just handing out. That reminded me when we were there. Handing out the gate code. So, we don't use the tennis court that much. We can't, justify it. Come play tennis anytime you like. What a wonderful approach.
Just scrolling back through the questions, there was one by Jack. Sorry, all the way at the top.
We use a different concrete here in Brazil with little triangles. I have seen that.
When you draw it with the concrete hatch?
Yep.
Is that what you mean? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he's saying that, traditionally in fact, Paolo's drawings with the concrete hatch is actually really quite beautiful. It's basically a series of various sized pebbles.
This one, it's in your book there, but yeah.
Yep.
I caused a bit of a stir at one point by telling everyone they were doing it wrong by doing it this way.
Did you?
So that was the old look. Just some informal shit. The app that I'm using is Concepts. So Scott sent me these photos, chucked them into Concepts, and I'm drawing over them. And when you're not doing shit live, you can get some nice detailing out of it. So that's sort of a bit of background, not a paid endorsement, but give it a crack. Probably, I don't think this gets saved, so this is it. It's about to evaporate. A couple of other questions. But look, we've go for it.
Someone there asking about the book. We'll post up a bit later.
Yeah, I think that's it. We've had about 250 people on the call. We're dropping off now as the attention span wavers. But look, I just wanted to say thanks a lot for your time, and it really is neat having an insight into a project that is pretty tricky to visit right now. So it's nice to have done it virtually and
because it's a very difficult house to visit because Paulo.
Sorry, champ, you're breaking up a bit there. Sorry, mate. It's either you or me breaking up. But before it gets too difficult for everyone to listen to, we might wrap this up. And thanks everyone for joining.
It's been fun. Cool.
If you can still hear me, stop by Scott's Instagram account. It's the architecture, the photos of the architecture schools and the houses, and I think probably the most interesting or inspiring is the photos of you visiting the studio are really neat. So go wear your thumbs out, do a bit of a scroll and roll, and follow Scott's account for a lot of insight into architecture that I certainly had never been exposed to, and it's also neat to contrast that to your own projects that you're constructing right now. So thanks very much, mate, and appreciate you sending me the resources and appreciate your friendship too.
Sweet, mate. Good to see you.
So let's wrap this shit up.